Hello and welcome to this video. I decided to put something together to talk about the problems that I have with tournament poker because there's some reoccurring things that have become very consistent across most tournaments in the world. I just think they could be improved slightly. I've quickly put a PowerPoint together. It's probably not the most visually engaging, but it's words on a screen so you can follow something. These are my biggest problems with tournament poker and the solutions to these problems, what we can do to make this, in my opinion, better for everyone, recreationals and pros alike. Main issues. For a start, there's inconsistent blinds, and I'll get on to what exactly I mean by that. There's sometimes a low average stack. Obviously, no one likes playing a tournament when the average is pretty low. Break times, I think, could be improved. Stalling is a really big issue with tournament poker, and bad payout structures. The first problem, inconsistent blinds. So I've taken an example of what is a really good tournament structure, one of the best tournament structures that there is. And it's a tournament where you start with 20,000 chips. You start with 200 big blinds at 100, 100, and this is the first 10 levels on the day one of the tournament. My first problem with this is you start with no ante, and then every single other level in the tournament is with an ante. So some inconsistency there. Why do we want to play with no ante for one level, the first level, and then just kind of throw it away? It almost makes the first level redundant because it's just so different. So I think antes from the start is one thing I would change. Second is you can see we start with 200 big blinds, and I think this is just too deep for tournaments because most of tournaments are played with 25 to 60 big blinds. So if you start with 200, it's almost like a cash game at that point, and I think we should have more differences between tournaments and cash games. I'm all for tournaments being deep, but 200 bigs is kind of just overkill. And I'm going to get onto why it seems like such overkill too, because for a start with 200 bigs no ante, repeat the level. So the first two levels, we have 200 big blinds for starting stack. And then immediately when we get to level 3, we have an increase of 100%. So the big blind doubles, meaning all the chips you make in those first two levels are now cut in half because what was once a 50 big blinds is now 25 big blinds. So it completely cuts your win rate in half because it's such a substantial increase in the blinds. And I think it just doesn't make sense to do things this way when there is a different approach that seems like more of a gradual increase. So I'm going to get on to how I would change that. So if you can see here, obviously repeating a level is great. And then we double the blinds, which seems a little bit inconsistent. And then this increase between 100, 200 and 200, 300 is really big as well. It's a 50% increase. So at this point, your 30 big blind win would become a 20 big blind win as that blind level increases, which again is a pretty big increase. It doesn't feel as big because you're so deep, but it's actually a really big increase. And then repeating a level, I think that's great. 200, 400, yeah, it's only a 1/3 increase. I say only, that's still pretty big. I think that's about the biggest the blind increase should be, about 33.3%. Then a 25% increase, 20%, 33.3 again, 25, etc. And then structure's pretty good thereafter. So how would I improve on this? This is something I put together as an example of how you could improve it. So start the stack with 40,000 chips instead, so you've got a little bit more leeway with the increases. Start at 200, 400, so we start with antes for a start. We start with 100 big blinds, which is still really deep. We're not going to be at over 100 big blinds very often in a tournament, so it's still a lot. Repeat the first level, so we're still on 100 bigs. After this, do the usual increase, 200, 500 by 25%, going from 2.4 to 2.5. Then repeat this level. You can increase the small blind, why not? But if it's the same, obviously it's not a big deal. Then we've still got 80 big blinds if we buy in now in level 4. Then the usual increase by 20%. And then if you're going to have this big increase by 33.3%, I think that's the time to replay a level again. I would increase from 3.6 to 4.8. I'd then go to 5.1 because this is like everyone's favorite level, right? Because it's really easy to count the stacks. Everyone likes the 501k level. Repeat this level. That's going to slow the tournament down again after we have this big 33.3% increase. And then 6.12 and 8.16. And then I think end the max late reg at this point, 800, 1600. So if you were to max late reg at the start of level 11, you'd still get 20 big blinds. I don't think you should let people buy in a tournament with less than 20 big blinds because it's almost it's a bit degenerate for a start because you're buying in with a stack which you could bust out very easily in one hand, and it's kind of an exploit where people buy in to increase their hourly by skipping stages of a tournament and then hoping to kind of spin up a stack or just like sneak into the money and tank, and it promotes stalling. It's bad for the game the longer you allow late reg to go on for because pros are going to enter as many times as possible so they get more chance to enter again. I think it's bad for Rex as well because they don't want to play all day and then someone just buys in, doubles up, and they suddenly have more chips than them. To be honest, I don't think you should be able to buy in day 2 of very many tournaments, but I understand why it should be a thing so you can get more people to play. But I just think they should cut it off at 20 big blinds. I mean, that's just a nice number. If you get in the very latest possible stage, 20 big blinds, it's still pretty short, but at least it's just a nicer cut-off point in my opinion. And for later in play, this is 2 other suggestions. You can either add these 2 levels, 2k, 3.5k, 3.5k, 7k, but these are kind of weird numbers people aren't really used to. Or if you don't want to do that, you want to go straight from 2.5k to 3k to 4k, and then from 3.6 to 4.8, then you can repeat the 2.5K, 5K level, repeat the 5K, 10K level. That's going to level out the structure a little bit too. That's what I would do at least. In this way, the blinds never increase by more than 33.3%. When they do increase by 33.3%, we repeat a level, so it slows the tournament down to kind of make up for that. So you don't end up with some levels being way more important than other levels, or the early levels being pretty pointless. So I think that's pretty nice. And you don't skip any levels too. Anytime that an obvious level is skipped, I think people always notice it feels like a massive jump. No one wants the blinds to kind of leapfrog over a level because it feels like the tournament's just suddenly got really fast. And obviously, if you want the tournament to be faster, I think rather than change the blind levels, just change how long the levels are. Change it from an hour clock to a 40-minute clock or to a 30-minute clock, etc. Don't kind of mess with the structure because the structure feels like the integrity of the tournament almost. You'd rather play more levels and the levels be faster than play less levels and the levels be longer, at least in my opinion, because you've got that more gradual increase. So it just feels like a more natural progression. But again, this is my opinion. Maybe some people disagree, but this is the sort of thing I would prefer for a tournament. So the next issue is when the average stat gets really low. So some tournaments, sometimes because of bad structure leading up to it, the average stack will go below 25 big blinds, below 20 big blinds, and I hear recreational players complaining about this all the time. Obviously, pros aren't happy with this too because the lower the average stack, the less playability in the tournament, the less skill edge you can have, and that's just not good for anyone involved. So you can there's something you can do to completely mitigate this. Put a floor on the average stack. So if you have the rule in the tournament that the average stack will never go below 25 big blinds or 20 big blinds or wherever you set the line at, then if the average stack were to go below this point, you just repeat the prior level. So as an example, the blinds are 1K, 2K. The average stack is 40 to 50K, so it's in that 20 to 25 big blind range. The blinds are about to increase to 1K, 2.5K, therefore bringing the average stack below 20 bigs. You just repeat the prior level instead, and that way the average stack will just never go below 20 big blinds. I don't think that's too hard to implement either. It's probably a simple algorithm to add to the tournament clock. But if not, it's just the tournament director seeing the average stat was going to go below and making an announcement and just repeating a level. And I think it's a really nice selling point for recreationals to play a tournament to, knowing this tournament will never go below 20 big blind average. I think that's quite marketable as well. So I would like to see more stuff like this. Next problem I think is breaks. A lot of the time you'll end up with 20 to 30 minute breaks in the middle of levels, and it's kind of that awkward amount of time where you can't quite go for food. So I think most people would prefer this 10 to 15 minute breaks between levels. You can still go to the toilet, have a cigarette if you want to, go for a walk, etc. But it's pretty clear that it's just a short break. And then for the actual dinner break, make it a longer break. So if people do want to go somewhere for food, if they want to sit down for food, they want to drive somewhere, then they've got the time to do that. So you need 60 to 75 minutes to do that most of the time, really. So I think people would rather lose like 5 to 10 minutes and all these other breaks if possible, just to have that bigger dinner break and know, okay, that's the dinner break. These are just the kind of short breaks. I would also say that there should always be at least 12 hours between the end of day one and start of day two because people want to settle down. Obviously, your mind's very active when you're playing poker all day. You can't just go straight to sleep. You want to have like at least a few hours, maybe to travel and get home to, then to kind of settle. And then you want to get at least 8 hours sleep too. And then you need at least an hour or so in the morning to prepare and kind of get ready for the next day. So anytime there's less than 12 hours between the end of day one and the start of day two, there's always that kind of rush and stress about it. So I think this gap should always be there when possible. And less chip races. One of the reasons some of these other breaks sometimes are longer is because they need to do a big chip race, but I don't think it's always necessary. And people generally don't like when most of their chips are taken and they're changed. So for example, if someone has all these stacks of 100 chips and then they're changed and they get one 5K chip, people are always complaining, saying that they feel like they have no chips now, even though obviously it's the same amount, but psychologically, it just feels smaller. So less chip races, I think, is good for recreationals, and it gives you more options with your bet sizes and stuff too. It's not that much more awkward to count. Someone wants to bet 3,200 instead of 3,500. It's not a big deal. A lot of the time, these chips aren't used. It's nice to build towers and pyramids, take pictures. And that's got to be good for marketing too, right? If I share this big pyramid stack I've got with some branded poker chip on them and I tag the venue and tag the event, etc. So I think it's just good. It's good to see people with big stacks. I think that's like, it's kind of cool. People like having lots of chips. So less chip races, I think, is good. Next problem is stalling. A lot of tournaments have found ways to go around this and address this. So I'm going to be kind of rehashing stuff that's being used, but not everyone is using these methods to stop people exploiting it. These are some of the problems where people are incentivized to stall. So for a table break, so for example, if I'm under the gun, I know I'm going to be big blind next hand, and there's a big blind ante, which is very expensive. I can see that I'm the next table to break, so we need to lose maybe one more player, and then we're going to have a table break, and I get a completely new seat draw. I'm incentivized to take as long as possible in this position, hoping someone busts on another table. Therefore, I don't pay the big blind. Well, maybe I move to the big blind, but it's at least a random draw for which seat I get next, which is in my interest to do. Another reason is for a pay jump. So if we're 16 left, 15th gets a pay jump. I'm incentivized to tank and tank and tank. If it's possible that I'm going to likely bust this hand, maybe I go all in but leave a chip behind. And when someone puts me all in, I tank before I put that last chip in. So there's just more and more time between me taking my action and therefore someone can bust on another table and I can get the pay jump just for kind of sitting there doing nothing. Near the bubble, so if there's a tournament with, I don't know, 24 paid, 27 people left, I'm incentivized to play as slow as possible, so then it's more likely people bust out on other tables. That is if I'm one of the short stacks. And the other one is dodging the big blind at the end of the day, so if I know they're going to pause the clock with 8, 10 or 12 minutes and they're going to pull 4, 5 or 6 from the deck for how many more hands we're going to play, well, if I'm 7 hands away from the big blind and I know they're going to pull a card soon, I can tank in that position. So even if they pull a 6, I'm not going to pay another big blind before the end of the day. So all these are incentives for me to stall. Therefore, it's a profitable decision for me to stall. So it's part of the strategy of the game. So what are the solutions to this? So pre-flop, I think a time bank should be 15 seconds because one, pre-flop decisions are a lot easier because there's less variables. Not to say you can't have hard pre-flop decisions, but that's what the time banks are for, right? So if I'm first to act, I shouldn't get to tank a full 29 seconds before I fold without any deterrent to me, because then I'm just going to tank 29 seconds every single turn if that's hypothetically going to be at my biggest advantage. So I think only 15 seconds for pre-flop, that's all you need. 30 seconds for post-flop. Post-flop decisions are more difficult. Maybe there's some nuance to this where if you're facing aggression, then we change it to 30 seconds pre-flop, but it's a little bit complicated. So I think just 15 seconds pre-flop, 30 seconds post-flop, that seems to resolve uh, most of the unnecessary tanking pre-flop, or at least caps it at 14 seconds instead of 29 seconds per decision, which is twice as much time, right, for all the time wasting. So that's something you can do. And time banks to be added, not reset. So at the moment, a lot of tournaments will give you, say, 6 time banks. That will be what you get for the whole day. And if you make it to the end of the day, they'll be completely reset and you'll get a new 6. But if I have time banks towards the end of the reset that I know I'm not going to use, or it's unlikely I'm going to use all of them, then I can kind of waste time by using them because they're just going to be reset anyway. So I think time banks should be added. I think if you make the next day in a tournament, they should be bagged as well. The World Series of Poker circuit event in London did this really well, where they gave you 4 time banks at the start. They gave you an extra time bank for every 2 levels, so every break you make, and they give you an extra 2 time banks when you make the end of the day, and you stockpile them up throughout the entire tournament. So there's people with like 16 time banks on day 3 because they've just not had any hard decisions, or they've not needed to use the time banks. Some people have only got 3 or 4 because they've had really hard decisions, or maybe they've time wasted at the wrong times. It becomes a resource and it completely decentralizes the time bank. And like, yeah, fair enough. If you're on a pay jump, you leave a chip behind, maybe use 1 still because you're trying to get the pay jump, but you don't know how many you should use, because what if you double up and then you get a hard decision later and you use the time bank that you needed later? So you've got to be more tactical with it. You can't just waste them. You can't time waste quite as much. I think that's 2 ways to mitigate this at least. It is still always going to be a problem, but it seems at least better than the solutions some places have at the moment. And the last problem, I think, is a bad payout structure. So these are the main problems. Tournaments are too top heavy. They pay sometimes 25 to 35% of the prize pool for first prize, and they pay too few players. So sometimes they pay 10% of the field or less than 10% of the field, which means a lot more people go home disappointed. And there's a lot more variance for both of these reasons too. So solutions, I would cap the first prize at 20% of the prize pool, at least for multi-day events or like big structured events or tournaments where people are satelliting in, where the min cash and making the final table and winning is already so substantial. You don't need to win more than 20% of the prize pool. When someone wins 30% of the prize pool for first, I feel like the difference in joy for winning the tournament between 20% of the prize pool and 30% of the prize pool isn't actually that big, but the disappointment when you come second, third, ninth, 15th, etc., and you get less money, I think is more noticeable. And obviously there's just more people that are going to be hurt by the fact that it's so top heavy as well. So I think they should cap it as 20% generally, at least for main events and for multi-day events. That's still a really significant amount of money every single time. So I think that's just a nice round number to cap it at. I would pay 12.5% of the field, and re-entries I would count as entries because there's no real difference. It's not a rebuy. You pay the reg fee again. You're literally a new entry in the tournament. I think that's a nice round number. Paying 15% is a little bit high, maybe makes the min cash a little bit small sometimes, and paying 10% or less is kind of too low because so many people don't get paid. And the reason for paying more people, you want the money to be spread out more. That's good for the poker economy. It's good when a satellite qualifier is going to cash the tournament more often. It's good when the min cash is also at least 2 buy-ins, so then anyone that's entered twice at least breaks even. Anyone who enters once or satellites always makes a profit. When you start to pay 15%, sometimes you get 1.5x the buy-in, and someone that's re-entered is not in profit yet. And a lot of tournaments people are doing 2 buy-ins. I think two times the buy-in is a nice min cash. 12.5% seems like a nice round number to me. I don't have a proposed payout structure, but I think those two factors are nice enough to work something out. If I were to give a quick example, let's say it's a 1,000 buy-in, that's 100,000 prize pool, reg fees, whatever reg fee is. Pay 12.5%. So in this case, I guess we would round up to 13 players paid. Min cash would be at least 2,000. Max cash would be at most 20,000, and then some sort of nice formula to make it so the jumps are pretty consistent, like slowly getting bigger in the middle. That seems simple enough. You can do that for any tournament, and that just seems good for everyone. It seems good for Rex. It seems good for pros. No one takes too much out of one tournament, and people get like small amounts more often. I think that's just got to be good for the poker economy. It's got to be good for the happiness of the players. People aren't as bothered about these really top heavy big prizes, to be honest, because it's just so hard to win a tournament. Like, it's all good that the winner's getting this really big prize, but you want people to be happy when they come ninth. You want people to be happy when they come fifth because they get a decent amount. You don't want them to be looking at realizing that they came sixth and the person that won it got 10 times as much as them. You want it to be a more similar payout. But yeah, they're the general ways that I would approach payouts. Yeah, they're the problems I have with tournament poker at the moment and my proposed solutions. Thanks for watching. And if you have any suggestions for tournaments, please put them in the comments. If you know tournament directors or anyone that can actually make a difference on this sort of stuff, please share this video with them. Let me know if you think any of these suggestions I have are bad or good for whatever reason, how you could improve on them, etc. Let me know in the comments, and like, share, comment, all the good stuff. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, and goodbye.